Whatever it is, coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt, like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists. And in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world. And ready to fight for it.
Welcome to the webcast Leading Positive Change in the Midst of a Pandemic. Welcome to all of you watching today. At this moment, nearly 300 people are following this stream, not only in the Netherlands, but also in France, Ireland, Canada, and even in Puerto Rico. So a special welcome to all of you living outside the time zones GMT+1 and watching this webcast late at night or in the early morning. I'd like to welcome you as well on behalf of the organising parties, being Veolia Nederland, the French Chamber of Commerce and the Ireland-Netherlands Business Association. My name is Sineke Breemhaar and I will be moderating this event. And we love to hear from you. During the entire webcast, the chat function is available, so don't be shy and please share your questions with us, including your name and your country. And then there will be 3 moments reserved during this webcast where we will be addressing your questions. But to introduce the topics we will be discussing today, I'd like to share some background information with you. This year, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And we're also celebrating the 5th anniversary of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, the Dutch government has created legislation with concrete targets to reduce our carbon footprint, or also called greenhouse gas emissions, with 94% in 2030 and to reduce them to net zero by 2050. And the EU has announced similar targets to be climate neutral in 2050. And China did the same, but then announcing it to be achieving the climate neutral goal in 2060. All these goals require substantial investments, and they require an ecological transition, and they require leadership to make this all happen. But what are the foundations, the pillars for sustainable change that we have in place today? And what's the impact of the pandemic? Will we bounce back or will we leap forward? Bearing in mind that this year, caused by the pandemic, an estimated 272 billion school days are being interrupted or being lost. Millions of you have marched in solidarity addressing social inequality. And again, this year, more regions have been hit by wildfires, drought or flood. Let alone discussing loss of life, unemployment and the impact on our GDP. In this webcast, we will be talking to change leaders and their vision on where we are today and where we will be tomorrow, about leading positive change in the midst of a pandemic. We'll start the conversation by diving into the topic of financing the transition towards a net zero economy. And I'd like to introduce to you Anjuli Pandit from BNP Paribas. Welcome, Anjuli. You're sitting in London, and I'd like to start with a question. Can you tell us a bit more about the process your bank has followed to define green financial products? How did that work?
So, you mentioned the United Nations, right?
Yes.
Fundamentally, everything that we need to achieve from a climate perspective is outlined somehow in the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And at the bank, what we've done is look at that first from a risk perspective. So trying to understand, what does climate risk mean to a bank? So physically, what do hurricanes and natural disasters mean to the assets that we finance, to the companies that we lend to the areas that we also as a bank work? And then also from an opportunity perspective, what could we be investing in to help solve the climate solutions? And what should we not be investing in as much, or what should we be moving away from in order to make sure that we're not perpetuating and causing more of this climate degradation? So as a bank level, we really started to create certain types of products that would help us get more granularity and visibility and transparency on what is green projects and what is their impact that they have in terms of reducing emissions or helping with biodiversity, etc. And some of them are for us. We lend to banks. We lend to companies. We lend to entities where we can give them green loans. We can give them loans that are tagged to a KPI that helps them achieve some kind of emissions reduction target, which gives sort of different kinds of incentives. But also we create products that we take to the market for larger institutional investors, for asset managers, pension funds, insurance companies who also want to make sure that they are investing in green projects and having positive impact and making sure that they're understanding the risks and opportunities of climate change in their own portfolio. So we create products such as green bonds, for example, which are bonds that we sell out into the market to investors, where the company who raises that bond also puts in a framework explaining how they're going to use the proceeds of that bond in order to address some kind of an environmental issue, either energy efficiency measures or investing in renewable energy, for example. And so that's kind of what some of these green products can look like.
Okay. And what do these products mean for the people using them? Are they, from their perspective, because they're green, do they have better terms? Are they cheaper? So what does it bring for the companies using them?
So, it's a really good question. I think there's a few things. So are they cheaper? Let's address that first. And I'm going to let Cécile Moitry speak a little bit more because she's also a part of this event, and she looks after our loan portfolio. So she can tell you if our loans are cheaper for green projects from the bank side. But if I were to take, for example, a bond to the market, there is such a huge demand right now from investors to really, get access to these green assets, to be able to report. There's something called the EU taxonomy coming next year, which is sort of a regulation that says that if you want to align your portfolio as being green, that you would need to report against this really large taxonomy, which is basically kind of an encyclopedia of every green possible project you could fund. So I think there's this huge demand that's growing. And because there's that demand, we are seeing green bonds get better pricing, cheaper pricing, because supply and demand. There's more demand, and there's not that much supply, and that supply is growing. And I think eventually, we'll get to another place. But what it really gives the issuer is an opportunity to concretely explain and market their sustainability strategy and how they are meeting that strategy through investment in CapEx to investors, so that as investors further integrate environmental factors into the way that they measure all businesses in their portfolio, that they continue to see this company as a strong credit to be investing in.
All right.
And what it provides investors is real transparency and data on how that company is investing in green projects.
Okay. And from a bank perspective, how does your future look like? Now you have all these green products on board. What has changed for the bank?
Oh man, what has changed for the bank? I almost want to say what has changed for banking, right? Us personally at the bank, we've gone through a serious internal transformation. We want to be the bank for the energy transition. We are training all of our employees, whether they're client facing or not, on what does energy transition mean, what are the solutions to climate change, on the UN SDGs. So I think it's given us a new meaning. I think it's given us a slight change in our work culture. Banking is supposed to be reflective of what society requires.
And did it bring new customers, for example? Or did you lose old customers? Is there a change in that, in your portfolio of customers?
So there has to be a change, because once you start integrating environmental and social and governance and these other issues, your portfolio is not going to look the same. So yes, there are certain types of businesses that we have realized are not going to contribute to the economic prosperity and the requirements that society has. And so we have less of that in our loan book. We support less of that in other types of our businesses. And we definitely have deeper and more interesting relationships with our clients now, because we're not just talking about what kind of lending do you require this year for your balance sheet. We're talking about, are you aware of your carbon footprint? Are you aware that your customers and your shareholders are studying that carbon footprint, and we can help understand that strategy for you and help you find this the funding to change and to reduce your carbon footprint, which is a much deeper conversation with companies than what we were having before, I would say.
Yeah. In January this year, the biggest global investment group called BlackRock announced to start divesting from thermal coal. What's your opinion about that? Would the bank do something the same? How do you look at that?
So there's a huge debate that we're having in the financial industry right now. And that's a debate between whether or not you should use your power as an investor or as a bank to divest, which means choose not to give funding to certain subjects. And we see that strategy growing in numbers in terms of not investing in coal, not investing in tobacco, for example. There's quite a few of those types of subjects. And then there's another debate that says, you need strong engagement, right? That you need to continue to engage with these, let's say, coal companies so that they do cleaner coal, so that they find ways to slowly reduce their coal output and train up the people around those industries to have other jobs. I think at BNP we take a dual approach, and personally, I think that's what is required in the short to medium term. We do have some strict divestment policies. Okay. We do not do, for example, any kind of oil sands. We have fracking policies. We have Arctic drilling policies. We do have a coal exit strategy. But at the same time, we obviously do have companies who have coal in their portfolio, because it's extremely important to make sure that this is not just an abrupt energy transition, but that this is what we call a just transition, meaning that you're keeping in mind the local economy, the need for affordable access to energy in this process. And so we are helping those companies by engagement to transition themselves out of their coal strategy and provide them funding mechanisms to support that process of moving them towards more greener technologies.
Mm-hmm. All right. And on a more personal level, how has your previous work experience and your private life shaped and informed you? And what made you decide to start working for a bank?
Okay, so full disclosure, I grew up in Aramco in Saudi Arabia, and my whole life has been very oil-defined, oil and gas. So my father worked for Chevron, so I grew up in Saudi, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, basically where you have big oil centers. And I think in doing so, I saw firsthand what a dependency on a finite resource can do to populations, can do to the planet. I think also I have a deeper understanding of how phenomenal the last few decades of the development of the Industrial Revolution, and oil being a really important part of that, has been in terms of providing real access for social development. and an affordable energy access for people in really tough parts of the world that otherwise wouldn't have had that energy. So I think that really reflected in me a kind of mix of being part activist, but also very much I'd like to be inside the institution to change it rather than kind of on the street picketing sort of strategy. And so I've had I kind of in search of trying to understand what needs to happen in climate change better and what that means from different stakeholders. I've sort of chosen this career path where I've worked in the public sector. I've had the amazing opportunity to work in the Obama administration. I've worked for Al Gore's organization, setting up his NGO in India. I've also had the opportunity to work in the private sector for a solar light company, selling solar lights in villages in Africa and India to see what that means on the granular level. And then, then to come to a bank was a bit unique for me, and because I didn't really know anything about the banking sector. But I think what I saw in that attraction was that point where I said, you have to be able to work with what is the established systems and see how you can change them from the inside. And there's no bigger and more important system than finance. And so I felt that would be an opportunity to really understand the finance industry, understand its role, and figure out how we move the capital towards the solutions of climate change so that we really, truly fix, what we've been, the problem that we have.
All right, we're already at the last question. So what would you define something like change? What is the biggest driving force for you to drive this change? Just in one sentence.
My son?
All right, okay. Well, all right. Thank you, Anjuli. That was a very short answer indeed. We'll come back to you with questions from the audience after we've been moving on to the next topic. Because we will zoom in on change on a national level, and we're going to look at a video and a campaign that was launched during the first corona wave in the Netherlands by the Dutch organization called Changing.
Everything you see around you was created by people like you and me. The companies, the economy, the system. It's not something that is just there and always will be. No, it's something that is always on the move and is set in motion by people who find new ways, see new opportunities, don't settle for the status quo. Because it can be done better, more sustainably, healthier, fairer, more profitable. For all these people who work at all those companies who are not waiting for the future but want to design it themselves, there is a platform. The platform for changemakers of today and tomorrow. Companies where change is not an item on the agenda, but a business model. Change Inc. Because tomorrow is invented today.
Hello, Yuri. Hello, Yuri. You're the founder of Change Inc. We just saw the video of the campaign that you've launched. Can you tell us a bit more? You mentioned it's a movement or a platform. What does that mean?
Well, yeah, we're a platform of changemakers. That's what we're called. And on the other hand, we're a movement as well, because we're trying to connect people, business and ideas for a better future. So we try to make the planet and the economy more sustainable by working together and by showing inspiring examples of change. Yeah.
And have you set certain goals? And what would you call success for your movement?
Well, the thing is, if I look at it personally, I come from the building industry, and I used to work for a recycling company, for instance. So what I would like to do is make sure that the future economy and a more sustainable economy is built faster than with the pace it's now being built. So that would be my personal goal. But on the other hand, I see all kinds of fantastic examples and innovations from all different companies from all different sectors. And well, if you connect those companies and let them work together and show their examples and their experiences as well, then it will be quicker. So that's my goal.
Yeah, I understand you're aiming for kind of 100 change makers in total.
Yeah.
That's one part of the success, maybe?
Yeah, well, we show all kinds of examples of all kinds of change-making companies, but we love the fact that we did it with a campaign with around 60 big corporates and multinational companies, and we added some 20 or 40 scale-ups and startups as well. Okay. And then you see the movement growing, and you see the intercompany relationships grow. Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant.
And what is it that made these companies join Changing and join your movement?
Well, we launched the campaign just after the first lockdown in Holland, and what you could see is that everybody got excited. How do you call it? Got afraid, and were afraid of what might be next, and how the world should look like, or would it look like after the pandemic. And on the other hand, I saw a lot of manifestos where companies and governmental people and scientists put their autograph under the manifesto declaring why it should be different after the pandemic. And I'm used to working with all kinds of companies that are already building the future right now and showing all kinds of examples and innovations that are scalable and ready to use for all companies in all different sectors. So that's why I thought I should do something, and I just set up the campaign, and a lot of brilliant companies joined me, making a statement that the future is built today already. Yeah.
And you call them Changemakers.
Yeah.
Are there certain criteria for companies to join the organization?
Yeah.
What would be the criteria?
Well, the criteria, we have a whole criteria set in place, but if you look at the companies we love to join, we're working together with, their companies who have a clear vision, that's for one thing. They have an ambition that's going further than only today. So they're not ready yet. They know that they have to move on, and they want to move on. They have fantastic examples showing to other companies for them to use those examples and to make it scalable.
So they're transparent from that perspective.
Yeah, they're very transparent, and they show leadership as well, because they want to be in the forefront of their sector.
So these are the criteria you're looking for.
Yeah.
And how do you make sure they're also being followed up, and they're being monitored, so you prevent the accusation of, for example, greenwashing?
Yeah, well, for us it's quite simple, because I have a very big group of editors, journalists that are curious, and they want to make sure that when they write about something, then it's true, and they do a continuous monitoring. So they measure it, they look at white papers, they have interviews, of course, and they make sure that the cases and the vision is correct. Yeah, and that's our measurement. And well, I think if you look at greenwashing, we know by experience that there's no company in the world that is already 100% sustainable or 100% fit for future. So within that context, it's nice to have examples, but not pretend that you do it all correctly, and that there's no room for change anymore. Yeah.
And an organization or a large company, like for example Shell, should they, in your perspective of following your criteria, be able to be a change maker?
Well, every company can be a change maker, that's for sure. But I think there are more and more companies that are on the forefront or in the forefront of change. So within the campaign, we just selected the best companies there are, and there are certain companies who are not yet.
And if I remember well, Shell is not on the list yet, so
Shell
they can be in the future.
For sure, if they do the right things and they step up their pace a bit, and maybe divest a bit, like I heard from the lady from BNP. Yeah.
All right. Well, and a final question. What would be the 3 characteristics of the organizations joining Changing? How would you describe them?
Well, I think the first one would be positive, I guess, positiveness. If I talk to entrepreneurs, but also the directors from those companies who are change makers, then you can see that they have a very good outline on how the future should look, and they are very positive on reaching those goals. So that's one thing. The other thing is being creative in reaching those goals, of course, because it's not an easy ride. A lot of things you have to develop or have to change are not already in place and not already been developed. And the last thing is, I think it's leadership. If you see that the mass of companies in the world are still moving to the left, for instance, and you dare to keep going on the right every time, then there's a lot of leadership in place, and you have to grab everybody along and make sure that change is being made. So. Leadership is one big part, I guess.
So leadership is a crucial part to make this all happen.
Yeah.
And transparency you mentioned, and to the vision.
Yeah.
Those are the three main elements
Those
of
are
the
the main
Changemakers.
elements, and that's I think it's very inspiring to work with those people, because I can learn a lot from them as well.
All right. Okay, thank you, Yuri, for introducing Change Inc.
Thank you.
And we have the first questions coming in from the audience. And I see the first question coming in, and I think this is a question from Anjuli. When entering the bank with your ambitions for change, did you like what you saw? So, Anjuli, can you answer that question? Were you pleasantly surprised, or do you think it's a long way to go?
No, I have been so phenomenally impressed with the magnitude and the enthusiasm that this bank has taken for sustainability. It's way beyond my expectation of the level of impact that I would be able to have in a bank.
All right. Can you give an example of that? What was the thing? What was one of the things that you were really pleasantly surprised about?
I mean, take for example, we decided to roll out a program to really educate middle management, senior management, young talents, and people in certain key front office roles on not just sustainable finance, what this product means for your client, but on the bigger picture of sustainability at large. And so we sent hundreds of employees to Cambridge for lengthy, long programs where they dug deep into every aspect of what are the UN SDGs, what is poverty mean globally, what does climate risk and opportunity mean, how do you measure and report on carbon footprints. I mean, it was phenomenal. And I think that is why we're seeing the level of innovation in every part of the bank in our products in sustainability, because we now truly have it as part of, quite frankly, sorry, but to say even our DNA as a bank.
Mm-hmm. That sounds indeed impressive. And is this a unique approach that BNP is following, or are more banks doing this?
I think every bank has a different approach and with different levels of success. At BNP, we've chosen to really be decentralized, to make sure that there's expertise in every part of the bank, tapping into those who are already there and helping them build expertise, or, in certain cases like me, hiring people from very much outside the banking sector so that you bring in a different view into different parts of the bank. And we've chosen to sort of spread it both from the top-down support, but from a kind of grassroots growth where we give a lot of space to innovation and ideas. At other banks, I've seen, a much more centralized group, which on one hand can provide, a really clear area to go when you need that expertise. But I think personally, because of the way we've done it at BNP, our level of innovation and our level of integration on ESG and our ability to converse at a very high level with all of the different types of clients we have in every product base is unique.
Okay, thank you. A next question is about the pandemic. Has it slowed down the investments? And Yuri, you've seen so many companies as well. Do you have the impression that the investments are,
slowing down? Well, I guess you see insecurity, and when there's insecurity, then that could mean that investments are going down. So I think it will have an effect. but I'm quite positive about the pace being picked up again when the pandemic is a bit more away from us and vaccines are there.
Yeah. All right. And Julie, what's your impression?
The COVID-19 has been very interesting for the sustainable finance market. On one hand, we have seen a steady performance of green bonds, but not the kind of exponential almost looking growth that we saw year on year. So last year, for example, we reached almost 250 billion in green bonds. This year, we're on track for a similar level, whereas the year before we were less than 200. So it's not like we thought it would be 300 or more billion. But it's been compensated by the fact that we now have a huge push on social bonds. We even have something called COVID-19 bonds. And these are bonds where the use of proceeds is linked to helping governments, banks, companies, whoever's issuing, to address the things that they're going through with COVID-19. So we've had a lot of sovereigns and supranationals come, with R&D on vaccines, PPE, supporting unemployment and welfare schemes, being able to access this market in the format of social bonds. So I think what the COVID-19 crisis has done is, one, provided an opportunity for companies to really double down and say, these are still my environmental goals. We still believe in the green bond market. We're still going to go ahead. And second of all, it's provided an opportunity for us to expand beyond just the environmental conversation that was really dominating the concept of sustainability and move a little bit further into how we deal with the social factors. Because I think it's so clear to everyone, no matter which country you live in, which city you live in, that our social infrastructure wasn't prepared for this kind of pandemic, from education to healthcare, etc. So it's really catapulted a motivation to get involved in supporting those sectors too.
Yeah. So you're already mentioning the social impact. Yuri, do you think that the pandemic was responsible for making people more receptive to change?
Yeah. I think a lot of companies woke up. I think there was still big critical mass around sustainability, and the fact that they thought it was all more expensive by becoming more sustainable, and that's changing now. So you see a lot of companies moving to the forefront, are curious of changing their business, indeed still keeping up their investment levels. So I think, you see a lot of change over there.
Did make people more receptive for change.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's from anxiety or from being scared. It also has a positive effect. Indeed. Yeah.
And coming back to the success, to round these questions up, that was the last question. What could you explain its success according to you? What is the success?
What's the success for me, or for the movement?
For the movement, sorry.
The success for now is that the success of the campaign is making sure that all that big critical mass sees that there are a lot of companies who are in the forefront of sustainability, make a good profit out of it, and are able and willing to change more and at a more rapid pace. And that's one of the successes. We just get you get inspired when you see all those good examples, and you see those cases, and you can read about them and try to use those cases to make your own business more sustainable.
To follow them up and to speed up.
Yeah, and now the second phase will be in place, and that's connecting those companies, working together with those companies, and make sure that you from being in the forefront, you share your experiences as well to the other companies who are just starting, and to make sure that the economy changes at a rapid pace. So,
all right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Yuri, and thank you, and Julie. And Julie will come back to you at the end of this webcast. The chat function will remain open. So please keep on sharing your questions with us. And the next topic will be introduced by sharing with you what the people on the street think and know about the Global Sustainable Development Goals.
absoluut niet.
Nee, absoluut niet.
Nee.
Not so much, but yeah, I have some knowledge of that, yes.
17?
17
Ja. Zonder spieken, hè? Ja.
Nee. Nee. Oké.
Ja, de Sustainable Development Goals.
Ja.
Water.
Oké.
Dat vind ik heel belangrijk, omdat bij een vorig bedrijf deed ik iets met water, dus dat is daarom heel belangrijk. Ik ben geboren op een boerderij en ik weet dus ook een beetje hoe onze planeet eruit ziet en wat er kan gebeuren. En dan vind ik het wel belangrijk dat en mijn dochter en ook haar kinderen er ook nog een beetje van kunnen genieten.
Sustainable cities en communities is wel een onderwerp waar we ons ook mee bezig moeten houden, want straks zijn we allemaal een soort van arm en omdat we bijvoorbeeld door overstromingen en we moeten overstappen op alternatieve energie.
Ja, de consument is ook onderdeel van het bedrijfsleven. En ik zie dat niet zo als dat zijn de bedrijven en dat zijn de consumenten.
Ik denk eerder de bedrijven, omdat de consumenten gewoon minder middelen hebben om echt aan te pakken. Want als jij in een supermarkt zit, koop je eigenlijk al snel het goedkoopste product, zeg maar. Ja. Dus dan is het best wel moeilijk om dan van ieder product bij te houden of het nou wel op een goede manier is geproduceerd en dergelijke. Dus ik denk dat de overheid wel een rol daarin heeft om bedrijven een beetje te dwingen om beter voor het klimaat en dergelijke te zorgen.
Iedereen kan ergens beginnen om duurzaam te worden of te zijn. Dat is, of je nou zonnepanelen neemt of je doet met je bedrijf minder kachels aan of wat dan ook. Iedereen kan wat doen om er mee te helpen. Ja. Ik heb zonnepanelen thuis. Okay. Ja.
Ik denk dat dus bedrijven en overheden samen moeten werken om dit grote probleem voor elkaar te boksen.
Watching the video, 3 people have been entering the room, being Arco Berkenbos, Hildegard McGarville, Luc Radix, and from a live stream from Paris, we have joining Cécile Moitry. Hello, Cécile. And from Zwolle, we have Marlies van Weijen. So welcome to all of you. I'd like to start with a short introduction round. And I'd like to start with you, Hildegard. You're the CEO of Veolia Nederland. And the Veolia Group is the global leader in optimized resource management. And we just saw a lot about the global goals. And what do the global goals mean for your organization?
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. I think they're central to our business. So for people who don't know who we are and what we do, we originally were set up to provide clean drinking water in the city of Lyon. And that was way back in 1853 when there was 1 billion of us on this planet. And then with industrialization and population growth, because now we're close to 8 billion, and urbanization, then we expanded to where we manage also wastewater, provide heat and cooling to houses, steam and utilities to industry, and even now more importantly, kind of air quality and recovery of raw materials. And I guess our essence has always been to provide those essential services in order to progress human development. And that purpose and that goal hasn't changed. And again, it was ratified again in 2019 by our shareholders and our board. And practically that means that we have a multifaceted way of actually looking at how we perform, how we exist. Because basically, if we are not of service to anybody else or we don't provide something that's essential, we don't really have a future. Let's be realistic. And I think the pandemic and COVID-19 has shown us that highlighted that very much this year. So we're fully aware that actually what our role is and what it means. And practically it means that we have, of the 17 UN SDG, we have 18 KPIs marked against 13 of those.
Okay.
So it can range from everything to the reduction or avoidance of carbon emissions, so 1.5 million tonnes, we hope between 2019 and 2023. It can mean to double the amount of plastics that we recycle and we can convert into new materials. Or it can be in terms of our top management to increase by 50% the women representation in relation to where it is. Mm-hmm. and to be real and to be transparent and to avoid any confusion or interpretation of greenwashing. They're very clear. So this week I had our budget review in Paris, and there I had to present what we will do as the Netherlands in relation to that. Those targets are then accumulated across all the world, and they're audited every year and published. So what we say we will do is checked and we delivered against it. And it's the only way then to move forward and actually provide a multifaceted approach of what it means to be a successful, sustainable company that actually gives something back.
So that means that the global goals are part of your financial reporting.
Totally integrated. And from a management perspective, from our senior, from our CEO down, our bonuses are aligned to it. So it's not just what is our share price or our profit. It's really going back to what are we doing on biodiversity? What are we doing in terms of access to water and sanitation? What are we doing in terms of the employability of people? So all that is part of our reward mechanism.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Hildegard. Marlies, I'd like to move to you. Marlies van Weijen from Zwolle. You're the CEO of Van Weijen Verf, the fourth generation family-led paint business. When did Van Weijen Verf start focusing on sustainability? When did that start?
Well, I think that started already some time ago, at least in the third generation, the generation of my father. I think it's important that you look at the definition of sustainability, because in those days, sustainable was something different, I think, than we would define it now. But I remember very well that my father was very much intrigued by the Club of Rome. Of course, I was young at that time, so I didn't know what it meant. And I read it recently, so I now know what it is. But I can imagine that he was very intrigued. And I think he tried to use some of those insights in the way he did. He ran our family business at that time. I think he focused a lot of innovations. He, amongst other things, won an innovation award for a product with lower solids. We called it lower solvent. Sorry, we called it a high solid paint. But we were too early. There was no market for it at that time. But we, of course, used the insights of that time for our new product developments afterwards. But I think that was very interesting to notice when we look back. And another one I remember very well and always use in stories when I tell about my company is that also in the 90s, he had some gifts for the customers, and that were a range of little booklets about birds or plants or forests. Every year another book. And he wrote always his own preface. And he wrote, for instance, in the booklet about the forests, that it was so important to look after our nature. So I think 80s, 90s, we started with sustainability already.
All right, thank you, Marlies. I'd like to move on to you, Arco. You're representing Smurfit Kappa, a world leader in the paper packaging industry. What do the global goals mean to your business?
Well, first of all, paper-based packaging as a product has huge sustainability credentials. It's renewable, recyclable, biodegradable. On the other hand, the process needed to make it uses a lot of water, energy, and is very visible. I mean, we have many factories around the world, and it are big factories. There's a lot of steam coming out of the chimney, so it's very visible. So whether we like it or not, and we do like it, the social development goals, sustainable development goals, and sustainability should be in our genes, should be the core of our business. So what we did is we took all the SDGs and we looked one by one, do we have an impact? And then you think about climate change, energy, water, or can we be a support? Can we, with our products, with our solutions, support other industries or communities? And what made us a bit modest, but also more passionate than ever, is that after that session, every single SDG was on the list. We found that as a company, or by supporting other companies or communities, or by realizing and reducing the impact we had ourselves, every single SDG meant something for us.
Okay, all right. And how do you report on that? How do you keep track on that? Because there's 17 goals.
Yeah, so, and I'm sure we will talk about that also later. Of course, monitoring is vital. So we have externally audited every year a nice sustainability report. And like with some of our colleagues around the table, fully integrated with our financial report.
And is it also linked, like Hildegard was saying, to even to bonuses?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that should be a part of it. Yeah. We have a slogan, we want to be sustainable in every fiber. Mm-hmm. So the culture in our company is also then, if you say it, you also have to act like that.
Yeah, all right, thank you. I'd like to move on to you, Luc Radix. You're from Gemmelot in the south of the Netherlands, one of the largest chemical industrial parks we have in Europe. What is your drive to go for and then spend your time on sustainable solutions?
My personal drive, you mean?
Or your business drive?
There is an important personal component in it. But then I have to tell you something about the history of the region where I'm coming from. This used to be a traditional coal mining region. Mm-hmm. Both my grandfathers were coal miners. And those coal mines were closed. That was an important transition already in the Netherlands 50 years ago, which had an enormous negative economical and societal impact on the Limburg region. And now the economic engine for Limburg is Gemmelot, is the chemical industry. And we are facing a similar transition. The future of the chemical industry in Western Europe is at stake. So you have a choice. You have to change, or you will disappear.
So there's no choice, actually.
Now, I always have a choice. You can move your activities to other regions in the world, and that's what and that's where my chauvinism comes in. I want to keep that chemical industry in the Limburg area, but that means that substantial changes are needed. And I also believe that because of the specific features of Gemmelot, this is not a threat, but an opportunity. I think we are extremely well positioned to face this change process and to move towards cyclical chemistry. And that's our big challenge. And instead of being a threat and a second negative impact on the region, it could have an enormous positive impact on the region. And because I was born and raised there, because my personal history, I'm strongly motivated to play a role in that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I'd like to move on to Cécile from BNP Paribas, the colleague of Julie. What was the last time you had to deal with the Sustainable Development Goals?
Good afternoon. Last time it might have been 1 hour ago. Effectively, the tricky question would more have been, when was the last time I didn't have something to do with the UN SDG? The reason for that is I work for a team which is, I work for a team and for a bank which has sustainable development goals in this DNA. So first, the team, I'm part of the sustainable finance market team within BNP Paribas that works very much on the product that Anjuli alluded to. But, more widely, I also work for a bank that was the first bank to set or to include as one of its KPI reporting on a yearly basis as the SDG. So it's very much started, and it was back in 2016, and this is where it's very much started raising awareness internally and saying, okay, SDG, this is the compass, this is the new language that we have to all learn and use for that matter. And it's a driver, it's something that is monitored, this is something that is raising also awareness. And what I find fantastic with the SDG is, it's very much all-encompassing. It insists, it brings also to attention quite a few topics that, were not probably first when you talk about sustainability, like infrastructure, for instance. So, I like the fact that it's, I said it's a language, it's a colorful one with, lots of vocabulary in it. And so probably the third element, the way it is used, the way we use it within BNP Paribas when we talk about the SDG. So, this is When we report on that, we effectively map what are the sectors that we are financing that are strictly aligned with the SDG. And this is something that is reviewed by a third party. So, we want it to be extremely robust in this approach. And from that, we have also been able to use it in certain products. So we have put in place, the sustainable deposit using our approach of the SDG. We have also done a few transactions like sustainability linked loan, looking at KPIs for companies that were effectively using or making reference directly to the SDG. Maybe just to finish on that, we're very mindful that when you talk about SDG, there's a responsibility, and the responsibility is make sure that the approach is robust and genuine as well. So we don't, we don't want to be doing any SDG washing, and we're not using reference to the SDG lightly.
Okay, thank you very much. It sounds like the SDGs are a daily part of your on your daily business, so to speak. We'll come back to that part as well later on. For now, I'd like to know a little bit more about your strategies towards sustainability. Luc, I'd like to start with you because a chemical industrial park and then sustainable goals. Can you first tell us a little bit more about what the goals are? You set goals for 2030 and for 2050. Yep. What are they?
Now, the goals for 2030 are a reduction of 50% of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. That's the Dutch goal, you could say. But we are also developing plans to be zero emission in 2050, and on top of that, being completely circular. So we really want to make that move from traditional chemistry to circular chemistry. And in 2050, we have the ambition to be completely circular.
Yeah. And to have an idea about the magnitude where we're talking about. So what is your emission? How much?
Yeah, I was talking about the fact that Gemmelot was very well positioned to make that transition. And that is because the site is extremely integrated. So the output of one plant is the input of the other plant. And when you are able to make the input in your site sustainable, you are able to make your complete site sustainable. Now, the magnitude we are talking about is we are basically have two big feedstock, two fossil feedstock. That's naphtha. We are using 4 megaton of naphtha every year, 4 billion kilogram. And we are using 1 billion cubic meter of natural gas as feedstock. So not as energy source. On top of that, we of course need energy, but that's our feedstock. And the total greenhouse gas emission coming from that is 6 megaton of CO2 equivalents. But we should also be aware that the products that are leaving the site are still containing an enormous amount of fossil feedstock. And at the end of the day, that's moving towards Hildegard. And in the worst case, it's being burned. And then on top of that, an additional 12 megaton of greenhouse gas is being emitted. So the problem in our output is even bigger as the problem in our production itself.
Yeah.
So that underlines the need to become circular. Everything that leaves the site has to come back to the site as feedstock in the future.
So looking at your strategy to become a sustainable site, one of the challenges is to make it circular.
Yeah, so it's simple.
Yeah.
So it's simple. Yeah. Make your feedstock circular.
Yeah.
That's the first challenge.
Yeah.
The second challenge is electrification of the processes. So where we're now using fossil energy sources, mainly natural gas, we have to move towards electrification of our processes. So conceptually, we have a simple problem. We need to make our feedstock circular and sustainable, and we have to electrify our processes.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Marlies, to you, I've talked to you about your challenges as well and your strategy. And one of the things you mentioned as well is about also the base materials you use and something on bio-based materials. So can you tell us a bit
for
more
us
about
it's
your
important
strategy?
that we try to make our products more and more bio-based. And bio-based means that they are renewable. And if we put it in paint, of course, we get a more or less a circular product. But another way to be more circular is one of the other R's is that you have products that are now, for instance, I'll take our lacquers for protection of wood. Around 2006, I think you had to repaint your doors and your window frames every 6 years. Nowadays, we have a product that makes it possible that you repaint every 12 years. So that means that you use less raw materials and you can repaint twice times later than you used to do in the past. Which means the R of reduction, which is also some sort of circularity. So that's the ways we look at our products to make them more sustainable into the future.
All right. And Arco, the strategy from Smurfit Kappa, you already mentioned you're also, a high energy consumption. What is your strategy to become more sustainable? What are the pillars you have in place?
Yeah, so I think everybody, it's around planet, people and profit. We have announced a carbon reduction target of 55% 2030 and carbon zero at 2050, which I would say makes me proud being a European citizen, but makes me extremely proud being a world citizen. So what we have decided, and I think that is as a person very fair, since as Europe we have played quite a role in the climate change that's happening now in the world, to see that the forefront the European Union is playing now to make that our world standard. So also as the targets for our operations in the United States, in Brazil, in Colombia, etc., where you can imagine that the legislative pressure and the governmental targets are on a different level than we have in Europe. The other big thing what we do, of course, is also do more and more how we can vertically integrate in the chain, so with our suppliers, but also especially with our customers, to see how with sustainable packaging solution we can make the supply chain greener. Since at the end, and in this way, packaging plays maybe a little bit a special role. A packaging product as such has no reason for existence. It's only there to protect the product that's inside. So that's sometimes forgotten. So on the support area, one of our main roles is to help our customers to make the supply chain greener.
All right. And Hildegard, from Veolia, is there anything to add? So from bio-based materials, the circular economy that has been mentioned, are there more pillars on a sustainable strategy to add?
I think it just reinforces the integration that's actually ongoing. We've gone from a period where we used to take the raw materials from the earth, whether it's products or soil or fossil fuels. We just made something from it and then we just discarded it and it went somewhere, and somehow it ended up with 500,000 rubbish trucks going into the sea worth of plastic every year. And now we've become, I suppose, maybe more educated or aware, and as spoken before with Luc or Marlies or Arco, we have that complete integration where maybe the byproduct of one is the input product to another, and understanding that everything is integrated. And if we want to tackle one element of it, and I suppose that reflects back to the UN SDG, there's 17 of them, you can't take them in silos. And I think the greatest change that we need to make ourselves is realising that we are a part of an ecosystem. If we hurt the biodiversity in one end, it's going to hurt our air quality at the other. We've 7 million people that die prematurely from air quality, and most of the time it's the air quality inside is worse than outside. But understanding that interdependence and speaking that language, and it was interesting with the street interviews, some people understood it and some people didn't, and the buzzwords, but having that language is critical to be able to change behaviours to move forward. Otherwise we keep the same norms that we have today, and we will never get to the scalability or to the speed that we want to hit what is the Paris Accord.
Yeah. And to keep everybody on board and understand the urgency, Arco, how do you get your staff involved? How do you take them on this journey of this transition?
Yeah, Tineke, I think the majority of the cases we talk about sustainability as something corporate, as something legal, and I honestly believe it only will work if it comes from inside. So what we do a lot is bring every single employee with us on the road, and every single supplier and every single customer. And we don't do that with rules and legislation internal. We do that with, I would say, inspiration and innovation. One example I like to mention is that 2 years ago we launched Better Planet Packaging. That's our mantra and the way we want to work on sustainability. And spontaneously, BPP, the abbreviation, the initiative was born. BPP starts with me. And every single employee can do his own contribution, entry his idea to worldwide awards that are then celebrated globally. I mean, to give you one example, not this year, unfortunately, to the COVID situation, but 2 years ago, out of BPP Starts With Me, more than 8,000 employees of Smurfit Kappa joined the World Cleanup Day. And that was not something that was pushed from above. That was as an organic thing coming out of the employees. So I think we will only really make the change in sustainability if you make it a value and part of our culture, and not a corporate function that is monitored or forced upon people.
Yeah,
and there
clear.
all our efforts should be in.
Yeah, and Marlies, I know you've also worked on engagement with your organizations. What is the approach you took?
Well, I agree that it has to be intrinsic. I mean, I have to be positive about it, of course. If I don't like it, it will go nowhere in my company. I have a management team that has to be interested in the subject. But what I like most in my company is that I have a so-called green team, which are it's already there since 2012, which is a group of young people working for me. They are maximum 35 years old, and they help me to get all their colleagues more interested in sustainability. They think of a contest every year. I organize with them lunches about the sustainability goals to go into discussion with my employees in a group of 12 people with a nice lunch to talk about all the possibilities there are. Do they understand it? Can they talk to each other about it? And so that everybody gets more and more involved in the subject and also can see what is important for our company to what goals there are to reach, but also to show them that it's also so fun to talk about sustainability. It's not something that you have to do, but it is fun to do it and to see progress.
Okay, right. We also have a question coming in from the audience, and the question is: what messages do you companies experience are the most effective on making change on consumers? Well, dealing with consumers, maybe you can shortly answer that, Marlies, because you're dealing with consumers for your organization.
Can you rephrase the question one more time?
What messages do you companies experience are the most effective on making a change on consumers?
Well, that is an easy question with a difficult answer, because I think in the Netherlands, sustainability is not that much. Not so high on the agenda yet by my customers. I experience more positive discussions abroad, actually.
All right. And Arco, what's your vision on this?
Yeah, if I may add one thing to that is, I believe we as industries have been very capable of letting consumers pay a premium for a beautiful phone, or being very able to let consumers pay a premium for an expensive car. So I think we have to, and I think there are more opportunities than ever. We have now the moment to convince the consumers that sustainability is a core value of the product they buy. So I think we should move away from they don't want to pay and it's too costly, to say it as a positive and an opportunity. Since I think there's a massive, especially now accelerated by the current situation we're in, there's a massive opportunity to differentiate yourself and the sustainability of your product and create value out of that. Making it a positive story instead of a cost story.
I agree, Arco, if I can jump in. And we had one recently with Rickert Beckescher, and they were moving the packaging that you have your dishwasher tablets in. And traditionally, years and years of training and marketing is if you want to move a product, an FMCG product, it has to be shiny, sharp, catch your attention as you're working through the supermarket. And the whole change came there that it was going to be made from recycled plastic, which meant that it was grey. But grey is the new green, So the fact that actually it wasn't shiny meant it was authentically recycled. The same way that if you have an apple and it's organic, there is no wax sheen on it in relation to it. And I think that powerful message, because we've seen it with the Greta Thunbergs and we've seen it with the movement coming through. And I find it, what Marlies was saying about her team coming in, I think the younger millennial group push us even further. And I think in some ways they're leading the charge and we need to catch up. And I can see with our clients who are brand owners, it's actually their customers saying, actually, I want to make a change. I want to make a difference. I'm asking that of you. So I don't see it as either coming from the left or right. It's quite integrated and it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, all right. Before we move on, there's another video on the vision of the people on the street and then a bit more focusing on the challenges we're dealing with on sustainability.
Nou, niet per se eigenlijk. Ja, je hebt natuurlijk genoeg bedrijven die aankomen met verduurzaming van bedrijfspanden zelf. Dus die meer klimaatneutraal, dus die van het gas af willen, weet je wel, die dat soort dingen willen doorvoeren in bedrijven. Kijk, daar kijk ik op zich wel tegenop. Ik moet wel zeggen dat ik me afvraag hoe dat op lange termijn, of dat nou echt een heel groot verschil zal maken, of dat we niet zouden moeten wachten totdat we wellicht betere oplossingen hebben dan zomaar van het gas af. Want ik denk dat dat echt nog best wel een heel groot project is. Maar goed, het feit dat bedrijven daarmee bezig zijn en dat er dus ook bedrijven zijn die dit faciliteren, dat is natuurlijk al een grote stap vooruit.
Het mooie van Paul Polman is dat hij tegelijkertijd heeft meegeholpen aan het opstellen van die development goals in de VN. En dat hij dat met zoveel verve en inzet deed, dat er mensen waren daar met wie hij dagelijks werkte, die ervan opkeken. Toen ze hoorden, een paar weken of maanden later, dat hij ook nog in zijn vrije tijd eigenlijk CEO van Unilever was. Ik ken een bedrijf dat bijvoorbeeld zich inzet om de levensduur van grondstoffen te verlengen. Ook grondstoffen die door anderen als afval worden gezien. Ze zijn ook, bij het bedrijf zijn ze mordicus tegen verbranding, want dat is het einde van alles. Verbranding is natuurlijk ook een rendement van niks eigenlijk. Je kunt die stoffen beter op een andere manier verwerken. En zij claimen dat het binnen de bestaande economische structuur kan. Dus economie en ecologie gaat hand in hand.
Ja, wij zelf hebben geen auto. Wij doen alles op de fiets en openbaar vervoer.
Nee. Ben ik wel heel straight in nee.
En waarom niet?
Omdat het eigenlijk niet kan. Ik zal je een voorbeeld geven. We hebben verleden jaar een aanbieding gehad om een rode bietoliebol te ontwikkelen.
Ja.
Dat was op een hele duurzame manier. Maar financieel gezien, dan ga je toch onder markt zitten. Dat is natuurlijk niet goed, dus dat is wel lastig.
Nou ja, ik heb zelf geen auto. ik reis heel weinig. Maar ja, ik zou niet durven zeggen dat ik dat doe omdat ik daar zo mee bezig ben. Maar ik ben wel blij dat ik het niet doe.
Ja. Mijn ouders die zijn wel heel erg bezig met duurzaamheid en zo. Want altijd als ik mijn licht aan doe, dan halen ze mezelf soms van school af. Zo van, kom maar weer naar huis toe. Ook als ik te laat voor school kom, dan halen ze alsnog terug. Ja.
Bij ons staat duurzaamheid echt letterlijk op nummer 1 als het gaat om zowel de teelt als de mensen omgaan. We doen alles aan zonnepanelen, natuurvriendelijke oevers, natuurlijke, dus met biologie zeg maar de plagen en zo bestrijden. En daar willen we ons ook op onderscheiden, maar daar doen we heel veel aan. Het kan altijd meer, maar we doen er heel veel aan.
Due to our consumption patterns of make, take and discard, along with our existing consumption levels, there is still an abundance of secondary raw materials and we're still throwing away so many products that can be reused. Hildegard, what's your vision on this? Why do we still do this?
That's one where I was hoping for an easy answer, but it's a little complex. I think it really goes back to behaviours and again, infrastructure and how things were set up. You know, originally it was we grew hugely through industrialisation, and we just and our whole, I suppose, valuation of what is success today is based on market capital or GDP. You know, so what do we consume? What do we grow? Is it rapidly growing every year? And we have that general conversation. But we didn't think at the last part of the supply chain and what happens to those materials, you know, afterwards. And I remember even growing up myself, you know, it was, throw that away, it's rubbish, you know. And actually, that it's not rubbish. It is a raw material which we should reuse again because the planet will survive. The question is, you know, do we? So I think, and we can already see strides in it, and Arco was talking about maybe in terms of the world, the different position and what the European Union has taken. And we've seen really in Europe and Asia this huge trend now and transformation towards a more circular approach where we appreciate that the byproduct or household waste can become the raw material for another product. And it's slowly coming through, and we can see the Dutch Plastic Pact has happened. Then that led to the European Plastic Pact. We can even see virgin producers with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And all that will have a positive impact towards our economy. It's basically what the Green Deal is coming from. I mean, it was set up in 2019 before we had the pandemic as a way to continue to have growth, sustainable growth. I don't mean 3 jobs to have one salary. I mean actually having a society where no one's left behind. And I think we are seeing more and more of that approach in terms of circular products and companies understanding and realising that one can fuel into another. Yeah. And if I take it even just from our own perspective, in say 2019 we had 350,000 tonnes that we recycled every year and made a secondary raw material, a new virgin material that went into a Philips product or something like that. And now we see that will be close to probably 650,000 by 2023 and up to 1 billion by, by 2025. So there is this massive trend of growth, and I think it's slowly snowballing through. I think there's different elements we need to work on to be able to have scalability and to remove any blockers, and that can be legislation or education. Less so technology. I think we're okay there. But it's slowly now we're realising, and I think people like David Attenborough has brought into the social consciousness this aspect of, hey, we shouldn't be throwing away, we need to recover and reuse.
Yeah. All right. One of the challenges we're still facing is that virgin materials are often cheaper than secondary raw materials. Luc, are you dealing with that as well? Is that a problem you see?
No, that depends. We were talking about brand owners. Brand owners are not consumers, but brand owners are currently pulling very much for sustainable materials. The Coca-Colas, the Unilevers, the Procter & Gamble's of this world. And what you see is that those players are willing to pay a premium price. And that differs per market and differs per application. And depending on that, the sensitivity of recycled, sustainable material towards virgin price differs from business to business. So generally saying that low oil prices or natural gas prices at the moment is hindering the development of recycled material. That's not completely true.
Okay.
No.
Then looking at obstacles, what are the things that are still at this moment in the way to speed up?
Yeah, what I see is that when I look at Holland, I look at the Netherlands, and the climate policy of the government is very much focused on energy transition. And what we are doing is a feedstock transition. So we are closing the loop, we are closing the circle. And in the current policy, that's not really rewarded. So we are basically solving the issues further down the line. And further down the line could be in Germany or in France or in Belgium or all over the place, and not in the Netherlands. And the Dutch policy is currently very much focused at local CO2 emission. And that could be a limitation towards fast steps in and developing circular feedstock.
Okay. Is that something Arco or Hildegard that you recognize?
Yes, and I think it's a bit related when you talked about feedstock or circularity, is that I think one of the blockers is that we are a bit too obsessed by technological innovation. And I think, and of course they're challenging, but making a recyclable material or a reusable material is not the challenge. The challenge is making a product that is actually recycled and actually reused. And I think we overrate as a big blocker, and we do that as industries. Our customers are doing it.
But then why don't we actually reuse if this is technically feasible?
We underestimate the business system innovation that's needed. To give an example, in our own industry, I think the paper industry, and we play a role in that, has probably one of the best recycling systems there is, with an enormous collection rates and a very high quality material. So in principle, all these new materials where they mix plastic coatings and paper is polluting our system and making our recycling system much less efficient. So the fact that we have built this huge recycling system is not the technological challenge, but is the business system challenge that is educating of the consumer, collecting the material, creating the high quality, having extremely high yield until making it efficient.
Yeah.
And I think there we should challenge ourselves much more, that we don't need to develop sustainable, recyclable or reusable, but we should much more focus how to inspire the consumer and develop the system that is happening in practice.
Yeah. But it's part, if I can build upon it, because I agree, traditionally we've worked in silos, and it came out of my plant, it went to yours, and yours to the consumer, or to the retailer, and the retailer to the consumer, and the consumer to where it went. And I think really if we want to scale up, it's about having that integrated ecosystem and having that integrated supply chain, and understanding how we create those networks and relationships. And a few weeks ago we had it was kind of Philips, Bosch, Electrolux, kind of ourselves. How do we actually create a recyclable compound that means that vacuum cleaners are easily recyclable, so when they come to end of life, or we break them if you're like me, and they can no longer be fixed, although we've tried many times, when they go back, and the reverse logistics to collect them, can we have at least the same basic compound in them? So that means that we can more easily recycle them, more easily identify them, and we're not recreating different silos or different models coming through. Because if we talk about paper, we know exactly the same quality of paper, whether it's in the Netherlands or it's in Germany or it's in Italy or it's in Asia, or it might be called something different, but we know exactly what we're talking about. And that standardization we need to have to rapidly deploy this circular way of living.
Okay, and who should lead this change to, the clear identification of these products, so you don't have mixed products all over the place and you know what it is? Who should be in charge? Because the consumer just buys at the end and he's probably not aware.
Well, it's a good question. Sometimes it comes from the government, because the regulation come through. So maybe you have something like in the UK where they banned single-use plastic bags. 3 years later, there's 7 billion bags less. We've gone from 140 bags down to 10 bags. Did we need 130 extra? No, and that's changing behaviour maybe in it. Part of it is coming from industry to say, okay, we if we want to have this scalability and we want to be more use more recycled product, we have to change how we are operating. Part of it is coming from the consumer themselves, because they're becoming more educated and they're pushing back and they're challenging. So it's coming from many different fields. There's not one. It's a multifaceted approach.
Okay, yeah.
If I may add one thing, I think where the governments can help us is that we go away from trying to define perfect in class and start to accept that we are in a hurry, so let's implement best in class. And if you look in my little world, when we talk about packaging waste, Germany is way ahead of the rest of Europe. So if we first start, for instance, by saying, let's take the German model and copy that everywhere, then we make already many countries such a step forward that at least we have some time to develop perfect in class.
And what is the good part about the German approach?
That they with user responsibility schemes, they give a lot of responsibility to the supply chain, where you also talk about very black and white. They give the supply chain a challenge, like, okay, this you have to achieve, and you organize it with retailers, consumers, deposit schemes, etc. And with the Grüne Punkt and all these kind of things, I think the numbers say that the Germany is quite ahead of what we have in the Netherlands, and for sure what is happening in the United Kingdom.
Okay, all right. Moving on to financing all the changes we have to look into. How do you do that? Marlies, going to you, the changes you have in mind to move to bio-based materials. How do you finance these changes? How do you do that?
Well, we finance, of course, our research to new products. I don't fully agree that technological everything is already possible, because for my business that's not true yet. But we try to develop the products together with raw material suppliers of us. I need my raw material suppliers, because if they are not producing sustainable raw materials, I have big difficulty with creating sustainable paints. But what I encounter is that the request for those raw materials is still very low, which means that the raw materials are higher priced. And how do I create a sustainable product and sell it to my customers? If you are sustainable, prices are always higher than if you are not sustainable. And I think that is really a big problem that should be addressed by the governments in an urgent way. Because if we continue doing like that, it will be too slow before we make the transitions all together. Yeah. And another example is also the virgin plastic versus the recycled plastic. We have had a project together with Veolia to create a paint bucket out of post-consumer recyclate. We succeeded to do that. And then in March or April this year, there was this news that the oil price was very, very low, that they sold a lot of virgin material, but not the recyclate. And that is, of course, strange. And why didn't they do that? Because it was more expensive. So a lot of users of recyclate material changed to a virgin material when the price was lower. And I think that is the wrong way.
Okay. Luc, from a chemical perspective, is it something you recognize?
We are coming from a chemical industry that has a tradition of 100 years. So the way to produce virgin material is extremely efficient, and also on an extremely high scale. So being competitive by using recycled material is an enormous challenge. That is absolutely true. Yeah.
And this is where a bank could help out. How do you see the role of a bank in this position?
Yeah. Now, we have seen we have one of the highest quality recycle companies on site, QCP, who is producing recycled plastic that has almost the same quality as virgin material. And what I see is that the company was started up, I believe, 7 or 8 years ago, and one of the big issues at that moment in time was finding finance. So at the end of the day, there were all kind of regional investment funds who took the risks. But banks were very reluctant at that moment in time to step into a venture and a startup like that, and with huge risk connected to that. So certainly, when you look at equity capital, so bonds are easier, but you need a basis in risk-taking capital in equity. Yeah. And there could and should banks play a more important role, I believe. Yeah.
Cecile, do you like to comment on this? Do you recognize this as a role for the bank?
Yes, of course. And, there's also a lot of education that is happening on our side as to how do we look at new opportunity, how do we look at new business? Because we reckon that if we want to finance a world that is sustainable, maybe there's some sectors that we are financing that we have to reconsider, and are they sustainable on the long term? And by the same token, what are the new activity? What are the new sectors which we should be accompanying even from a very early stage?
All right. And talking about, for example, shareholders, we're now talking about funding. So you all changed to more sustainable solutions. Did your shareholders like that? Are they embracing the changes Veolia is inspiring to achieve?
They are, but I'm going to be rude and go build upon the comment made, because I think for sure it's about supporting new innovations when they come through, and I think the changes made in the last number of years to recognise if we want to step forward into the unknown and break the way of working, we have to support those projects, whether it's through Horizon, Alive, or different EU funding or bank funding. But I think also it's about creating enough demand. So you spoke before, Loaf, about actually just the having enough of demand coming through in relation to where it is. So you can be very brave like Marlies and very dedicated and step out and actually say, and we've many clients like that who say, I'm going to use recycled packaging, I'm going to put that sustainability on it. But if you don't have that demand, or maybe sometimes the support from the government is saying, hey, I want you to make that change, you're not going to have enough momentum to change the behaviour and to move the tipping point. So I think that's also an important element. But going back to your question, Tanika, in terms of shareholders, yes, we've seen it. Since we've been, I think, more clear, because our purpose to resource the world or to give access to essential services has never changed. It's been that since 1853. But since the market has happened, and with more PRI coming through, as Anjali spoke about earlier on, we've seen that core SRI companies now are around about a quarter of our shareholder base. And if I take that compared to the average French utility companies or equity companies and European equity companies, that's almost double. So we've seen a massive shift happening as people I suppose, embrace what we're doing and understand what we're doing and believe in what we're doing. That's why accountability and transparency is so important. But more importantly, and building on what Arco was saying earlier on, from our employees, it's also the same. So our employee ownership within the company has also grown because our employees believe in what they're doing, and they believe in what the company is trying to achieve and the difference it's trying to make.
Yeah. Yeah. And are there shareholders, maybe look to you, that left, or they say, this is going too far, I don't believe in these plans?
Yeah, difficult for me to say, because we are not a company, we are a site organization. What I see in a lot of companies which are active on site, on the Gemmelot side, that there is also a push from within the company. Because the chemical industry is very much aware that this change has to take place, that we cannot keep on going on like we did in the past, and that there is a fundamental change necessary. And of course, the initial steps are not big. We are not replacing 4 megaton of naphtha in one move. We need tens of years for that. But you see that they are very much aware that this change has to take place, and step by step by step, it's being done.
Okay, so there is an integral approach to make this all happen, because you're working together.
It was already said that the recipe is not ready yet. Still a lot of inventions have to be made, and a lot of technology has to be developed. And there's only 30 years left, you could say. So there is pressure, but there is still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And this changes, how are the organizations you're representing, how are they financing this change?
No, that differs. There are companies where cash is not an issue. Basically coming out of the traditional oil business. There is a lot of money over there, and which is good, and which helps them in financing this change. In other areas, it's much more difficult. So help in financing could be crucial for those companies, sure.
Yeah. And maybe, Arke, to you, what is the role of a bank you would expect to help to finance this change?
Yeah, I'm struggling with this question. First of all, since I'm normally the guy spending the money in the company. Since what I struggle with is, if you ask governments or banks for special things, you are chasing a bit the competitive landscape. We as a paper-based packaging company lost a lot of ground to single-use plastic purely due to cost. And recently, a nice example is Scholes, a big customer of us, moved again back from single-use plastic to recyclable paper solution, which will cost them a premium, and not 1 or 2, but but really a lot of premium. So I think you also need to let the economy and etc. do its work. And coming back on your question on the shareholders, I'm on the sales side, so I'm a bit further away from the shareholders. But sometimes I speak to them, and first of all, they're quite human beings. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they're, for me, similar like customers. So you have early adapters, you want that are very loyal, you have persons that are very black and white and say, I'm only interested in the short-term results. But I think that the amount of people in the financial community who now take this as a very, very, very serious KPI is big enough to work with them. And I think that has really changed in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, and that this change, what does that mean for your organization? What has it brought to you? Is there less pressure on quick, short-term results? Is there more room for future improvements?
No, since at the end, I think if there's one thing changed for us on our organization is that every new demand has always been on top of. So if people say, what are the big trends, what has changed compared to 10 years ago? What has changed is that now NGOs are monitoring you, investors want sustainability reports, etc. But it's not that they say, but then we accept that you're not profitable anymore, or we accept that you sell less. So I think it's on top of. But I think there's no plan B. So it's a challenge which we have to deal with it.
Yeah. Do you recognize that, Hildegard?
I do, and I think that's where we have to be brave and say, okay, we need to keep what we have today. And as Anjali spoke about earlier on, you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have a system that it is today. We are doing a transition to an energy transition or a sustainable way of living. So we have to focus on what is the end point, how are we going to get there, but still we have a duty of care to our current employees, to our current customers, to our current cities or municipalities, so that transition will come through. And I think more and more with the digital revolution as well, I think that transparency and that urgency and people are expecting real-time solutions, you know. So that speed at which innovation has happened in the digital world is really coming into what is traditionally corporations, and even how we create ideas, you know, from the bottom up, whether it's Marley saying about her team again coming through. We are no longer that hierarchical structure that used to be there at the time of the armies and you know, original, I suppose, multinationals like GE and the first ones. We now are in a sharing economy. Speed, response, time and action is now. So it is on top of what we actually have, but that just means that there's a greater challenge and an opportunity for us to move forward ahead together.
Yeah. All right. Then moving on, we're speeding up already. So a little bit more about the impact of the COVID pandemic. Basically, Luc, has it changed your life, your personal life?
Sure it did. Like everybody's life has been changed. So we're working a lot at home. And I don't see my team that often anymore. Unless, of course, on the screen. But when it started in March and April, you got used to it, and it was not that big a challenge. Then in the summer months we saw each other much more. Now you have to go back again to your home office and work behind the screen, and now it's becoming difficult. You at least I'm missing that day-to-day contact with my colleagues.
Yeah. So. And in Paris, Cecile, what does it mean for you, the pandemic, on a personal level?
Oh, so many things, so many frustration as well. But you know, stepping aside from the constraint, the personal constraint that it faced, what I found, at the heart of the discussion is, it's from the sustainable finance, we had a lot of attention being, brought to green, to environment. And I think this was a callback to say social is of essence. So this is something, in terms of evolution, we've seen a lot on some of the product, not all. But, this is what relate the most, if I may say, between my personal situation, and also because we're all, surrounded by lots of news, and many of those news are not so positive when it comes to economy and, from employment. So, suddenly it's a callback to say also yes, social is key and should be looked at more carefully.
All right, yes. So the social implications, and as you mentioned as well, that is something where we're vulnerable at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah. We've also seen that due to the pandemic, we can change, and there is an enormous sense of urgency. Well, Marlies, do you see anything that we have learned from this pandemic that we should keep on doing?
Well, I think we learn a lot from what's going on right now. For me, it was clear that everybody talks about energy, and we should save energy, and we should bring back our carbon footprint. But I think the pandemic shows us that the loss of biodiversity is even maybe a bigger problem than we first thought. And I think it should get more attention from today on, to restore everything, because the pandemic started, as I understood from the academics, from a zoonosis, which was caused by ourselves. So for me, it is, for me, I learned, and I hope we all learned, that the loss of biodiversity should be stopped, and we should start to restore that biodiversity.
Mm-hmm. So the focus not only on the energy transition, but on biodiversity. That's something we should pick up from the pandemic. Arco, I see you admitting that. Is that something you recognize for your business?
Business-wise and privately, I fully agree. And I think this also makes, and I feel that also on the business side, it makes you a bit modest, that you can't shape everything. And what it also has brought to us that we have to become more agile. I mean, and I think that is a bit, coming back to Luke a bit, what I feel a lot also business-wise, that in March we were much more flexible and agile, and now we are approaching the point that we are a bit sick of being so flexible and want to go to the old world. What I think the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest risk is we have now, is that we don't celebrate and don't reward the opportunities for the new future when this COVID is a bit gone. This brings to us, and we stay a little bit back about only the negative side, since it also opens up a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And can you give an example of one of those opportunities?
Well, for instance, I think that, and I think it's a bit, if I understand her correctly, related to what Marlies is saying, also the biodiversity in supply chains. I mean, I think it's a lot of opportunities to sometimes reward a bit less efficiency and celebrate that you have a bit more control. You know the person, the local shop around the corner. For us as a business, it has given a lot of opportunities that now, since a lot of supply chains were damaged, were difficult to run, that you say contingency, and having sure that you always have a plan B and a plan C now also creates a lot of value. It's not only a cost, but is also a value driver. So the complexity, I think COVID has not made our life easier, but complexity is not only an issue, it's also a big opportunity. If you can handle the complexity better than your competitor, it's a big opportunity. And I think what for me is very difficult. My kids every day say, "Dad, stop complaining. It's a fact of life." Since personally, of course, I complain 24/7. But we have to step out of and also reward and celebrate the opportunity it will bring in the near future. And I'm convinced about that.
But I think, Arco, it's like any change. Initially, you're very excited. You're looking forward to something. Like you move to a new country or you go on holidays, you're delighted with it. And maybe 4 months later, you're going, well, that's not the way we would do it normally in the Netherlands. And then you come out of it. So I think we're going through that. I think we made up our mind that, okay, it'll be there till August, September, and now it's going to be something more permanent. Exactly. But I think what has been positive is the sense of focus, because as you said, all the time there are movements happening, coming through. And it's clear we're going to go through this. We probably will have a recession. We have climate change coming through. So it's clear what we must tackle, in what order we must tackle it. Even from an EU perspective with the politicians, if I compare back to maybe 12 years ago, and Angela, you were speaking about working for Al Gore, you know, at that time when we started to do that, maybe 12 years ago before the Lehman Brothers issue, we're in a completely different place. We have our plan. We know where we want to go forward. We know what we want to hit by 2050. Yes, it's hard work, but it's coming through. And I think also I've seen from our staff the emphasis on essential services and being proud of being a community that actually have sustained society as we know it, and that the impact has been less, and that they're being recognised for what they're actually delivering as well, that it's real contribution and real difference to society. I think we should recognise, as you say, praise that and move forward.
Yeah, and there's also a question from the audience about the pandemic and the change it's bringing. What is the lasting change that we will face? So what is changing now and that we'll keep on doing? Working from home has been mentioned, less traveling. Are there more things that will permanently change?
I think the way we communicate and the way that we actually interact, I'm really curious. The longer this goes, I think the less and less we'll go back to, you know, traveling to our offices, whether by bike or car or public transport, and then going home. You know, I think that balance, and there has to be a balance, because also we were discussing earlier on in the green room. You know, what's the difference between your private life and your work life these days? You're working from home, so we have to resettle and refind ourselves. But I hope that actually it will give us better quality of time with our families and reshape what it means to be a corporation and a company going forward, and help us to focus on what is the community and how do we engage and you know, move forward together.
All right, thank you. We're already moving on to the last subject of today, and that's about change leadership. You're all change leaders, change makers, as was mentioned by Yuri. And I'd like to understand a little bit more, maybe to start with you, Cecile. What's your inspiration on change leadership? Where is it coming from?
I guess we're lucky in a sense that within BNP Paribas, there's been a lot that has been done on the sustainability side. So, you know, it doesn't come from nowhere to suddenly, you know, consider sustainable finance. And for that, we had the leadership of our group CSR team that has been in place for so many years, and, you know, building all the framework, all the backbone when it comes to sector policies, how do you address ESG risk. So, you know, we have that. And so I think, you know, they had, you know, this vision, and it was way before 2015 when suddenly everyone discovered the Paris Agreement. So it dated long, you know, much longer than that. Also, I think one important element, if you want to show leadership, is also, you know, apply and, you know, demonstrate leadership by example as well, and, you know, just apply what you recommend to do. And I don't think it's always easy. You know, everyone has ideas to what the other should be doing, but also applying this to yourself or to your own organization is you know, a true step to demonstrate that.
It's always a difficult question, but do you have an example of a person or an organization that you admire from this perspective?
Ooh, organization. That's a tricky one. Okay. It's not a curveball, but on some discussion that we have with our client when we implement product, and, you know, sorry, I'm a bit, you know, you're going to think I'm a maniac with product and always coming back to that. But this is really the moment where we can, you know, when we understand better what is the ambition of a client, what they're effectively looking at, what is beyond that. And on some occasion, you know, there's you know, one client that, you know, we listed what they could be doing, you know, their achievement, and say, well, this is a bit boring. You know, this is business as usual for us. You know, what we want to do is aim for 1.5 degree trajectory target. What we want to aim is for Biodiversity Index. And so, you know, this is the moment I was like, okay, well, they are impressive. And so the client here I'm referring to is UPM, but also I must say, listening to the panel and to the various panelists and, what they were doing at the level, I think it's, also there's a lot to it, and it's very impressive to see what is done just behind, certain commitments, certain communication, or even only a sustainability report.
Yeah, and something like the Biodiversity Index you just mentioned, is that something that can be shared? Because maybe that is something Marlies can benefit from and other companies as well? Or is it just something this one customer developed for themselves?
So this is something that this customer developed very much for themselves. But, this is just to say, this is something that we look at and then we can use. So, I would very much welcome to hear more about some opportunities of our panelists as well, and see what we can use and put that into practice. I think, well, the way we approach the transaction we work on is very much helping our client demonstrate their incredible ambition, their fantastic goals, and all the effort that they're putting within a product. So the product is just a mean. It's just an additional way to flag it and giving a lot of visibility.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to integrated solutions, because we're looking at examples, we're looking at leadership. If we all look for our own solutions, then we will have isolated parts, and we like to have an integrated solution. You're already working with that on the side. How do you make that happen? Where does leadership come from when it comes to bringing solutions together?
Yeah, you have to have alignment, of course. Although we are one side, there are a lot of different individual companies over there, and if you want to work on an integrated solution, you need to have broad support, and you need to have a common interest also in doing that development. And that common interest actually is the driver, because people are aware that the chemical industry is part of the problem, but even more important, also part of the solution. So this drive for sustainability creates enormous opportunities also for the chemical industry, and that's the common interest where people are looking for. And as soon as you have that concept available, people are willing to work together to come to one solution. Even if a lot of different companies from a lot of different areas, they're working together now to find that common solution.
Yeah. And can you give an example of a common solution or the common interest that brings people together?
Now, what I said, the output of one plant is the input of the other. We have acrylic nitrile plant on site who is producing acrylic nitrile, and the feedstock are ammonia coming from OCI and ethylene coming from propylene coming from SABIC. As soon as those products are green and circular and sustainable, that also implies that the acrylic nitrile that is produced by Anchor is also becoming green. So there is where those companies are connected, and where the solution for the one is also the solution for the second, and sometimes even for the third company. And that's where that integration helps us, and where a common interest is starting to develop.
Okay, so then you're looking at the entire chain.
Yeah.
Veolia is also looking at the circular economy, where you also have to work with change. How do you build these connections? So how do you use your leadership role?
Well, both within and without in and outside the organisation, because just going back to the overall topic in terms of the UN SDG and purpose and stuff, I mean, there were thousands of employees that actually gave their input into setting what those would look like, or challenging them or pushing us further in relation to where it is, which I think is a massive change happening with digitalisation. And the same for the models and the stuff that we're developing. So we see now that globally our centres of excellence can be anywhere. So Vromsop could be the centre of excellence for plastic recycling. We can have another in India, and another in Germany, and another in the UK. So I think that's one, building a consensus and a momentum internally. And then taking that same model and doing it externally. So if we're looking at I'll go with Lucas saying, in terms of an industrial park, like say that we have, say in Arnhem, and over 30 years we want to make that a more sustainable park. Then you're dealing with the tenants in the park, you're dealing with the owner of the park, you're dealing with the gemeente or the municipality, you're dealing with the province, you're dealing with residents nearby, and it can at times be a long process coming through. But I think the end goal is everybody wants to have a livable or sustainable city or area. Everyone wants to be able to go work and come home and feed their kids and have a healthy air to breathe and to work forward. And I think if you have that as your end goal, you can have moments where you have disagreements and elements coming through, but you know that's where you're aiming for. And I think sometimes the robust conversation challenges us to be better and to rise above it. So I think it's about having 2 ears, one mouth, and understanding the different positions for different parties.
Yeah, and then once you understand them, then you can
then you can go through it. And I think also we're going from a point of where we're all integrated, so we have to realize we're codependent on each other and we coexist in each other. Just at the moment, the same way we all have our mouth masks, that we are all interdependent. The health of one depends on the actions of another.
Yeah.
It also requires, I think, in line with what you said, it requires a bit of vulnerability, since you also have to be open that you have a problem or that you have a material that you say, I don't know really what to do with that. Is there anybody else who sees something useful? And coming back to what we discussed earlier, the opportunities. I mean, now when we live in such a digital connected world, what we did, and I'm very proud on that, is that we had some challenges on the sustainability, and we just posted that in the bigger social community, and we say, is there any student, any smart mind in the world that has a solution? We will hire you, and together we will build the business. And we got, within a month, thousands of ideas that we would never in any Smurfit Kappa R&D community could have. And there was at the end a young student in Austria who made a new product in her own kitchen, and we embraced that. And I think, but it needs for all parties a kind of vulnerability to openly admit that you need others to help you solve the problem.
Yeah, okay, that's a very nice example. We have some more questions coming in, some final questions from the audience that I'd like to share with you. And one of the questions was referring to the story of Anjuli and what is your driver, and it was, she mentioned her son. One of the questions was about education. So do we educate our children in the right way to move forward the global development goals? Anyone who likes to answer that question?
It's two ways. I mean, my son is studying in Utrecht sustainability science.
Yeah.
And I think he's educating me more than we him. So I think some of the people during the introduction said, well, my biggest inspiration is my kid.
Yeah.
And it's very cliche, but I think it's partly true. I mean, this next generation probably will educate us as much as we educate them.
Yeah.
And that they're more educated, they understand it, and it's coming from school child age upwards, and it's the same thing as smoking or wearing a seatbelt or any of those changes. They came from children at school and nagging a parent to say, that's another 2 minutes of your life gone, please. So I think really it's about role reversal and being open and being vulnerable and saying, I don't know everything. Let's move forward. I mean, the biggest momentum, I think, in the last lover or loather, depending on whom you are, has been Greta Thunberg. She's really put it to politicians, businesses, and really highlighted what has to happen. From a 16-year-old, that's remarkable.
That's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. And she got the voice.
I recently visited an elementary school in the neighborhood of Gemmelot. So we're doing programs with those children. And what struck me very much is the realistic view they have on the issue. And again, if you look at Gemmelot, they are very much aware of all the blessings that are created because of the products that we produce, but they're also realistically looking at the negative sides of it. The realistic view was that you cannot say get rid of it. They really see that you have to do it differently, and they have a realistic view on the issues that we are facing, on the complexity of the problem. So Even little children understand that it's not about simple problems, but about very, very, very complex issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that actually ties in with the next question from the audience, and that's about the SDGs and in sustainability in general. Is it integrated in your recruitment processes? Marlies, for example, is it part of your recruitment process?
You mean that I asked potential employees of mine if they are interested in the SDGs?
Or that it's a selection criteria to have this awareness?
What I notice when people apply for jobs at our company is that they like it a lot that we try to be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow it is integrated, but to say that I take the SDGs next to the application form and to check which boxes it ticks, no, not that.
Okay, but for example, it is a discussion when you hire people, or is it part of the introduction process?
To tell about our sustainability philosophy, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, definitely. Yes, we have some internal courses which explain what we do, why we do it, what is important, what we have to do. But what I like most is that people apply for jobs because they see that we are trying to do the good thing.
Okay, so it's a benefit for recruiting staff.
Definitely.
Okay, I see also Arco and Hildegard nodding. So what does it make a difference if you show that sustainability is important for your company?
Absolutely. So for sure we have people coming to us because they've heard or they've seen what they've done or we've done, and they believe in what we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. So it's which is a reverse, because if you think about it, if it's paper, if it's paint, if it's finance, if it's chemicals, if it's utility company, we're not the sexiest by way of the brands that we have, but actually what we're doing is essential services, and it is actually making a difference, and people can relate to that, and they aspire to be part of that journey and that storyboard. And I think also, like there's 17 UN SDG, and one of them is about equality as well. And I think it comes into our decision making in terms of representation, diversity, whether it is whatever culture or whatever region, whatever sex. I think that is now consciously part of our decision making process as well. Are we really having an organisation that represents our customer base and where we operate globally? Yes or no, and are we doing our part to promote that? And I think that part has gone into our recruitment process.
Yeah, okay, that's very clear. So that's indeed measuring the global goals. Another question that came in is from Annie in the Netherlands. What are some examples of projects internationally which each of the individuals in the discussion generally admire within Europe, personally or otherwise? So can you give examples of projects that you really admire? Very quiet.
No, this is not an honest. Yeah, it is an honest answer. we today there is a project announced on Camelot.
Okay.
Which makes me extremely proud, actually, because as I told you, we are using 1 billion cubic meters of natural gas, which is used to produce hydrogen. Mm-hmm. So-called grey hydrogen, which is an enormous producer of greenhouse gas. And today, RWE announced that they are planning to build a hydrogen plant on Camelot, where they convert mixed household waste into hydrogen. So that is an enormous step in circularity for Camelot. That will reduce our use of natural gas with 20%, so it's also a substantial step. Mm-hmm. So that makes me very proud, to be honest.
And that is something that can just be announced today?
That was, coincidentally. We didn't plan it for this meeting. Coincidentally, it was announced today. Yeah.
Okay. Arco, do you have an example of something, a project that you admire?
Yeah, so, and I think Marlies already mentioned it, that one of the challenges of the paper industry is biodiversity. We are not doing deforestation. That would be quite stupid since it's our raw material. Mm-hmm. But biodiversity is very important. And what I really enjoyed and admired at a certain moment in time, a couple of years ago, we said we don't know if we get it in order in the supply chain. But from now on, we promise that every single product we sell on the market is certified FSC. That's this independent trademark on biodiversity. And by promising that publicly to the market, from Colombia till Canada and from Russia till Netherlands. I mean, in Netherlands and Sweden, that's piece of cake. But you can imagine that for Brazil and Russia, that is real big issues. But by promising at the end to the customers, you put so much pressure on the rest of the supply chain that there is no plan B. And I think that is also some of the tricks. We have to be a bit more brave in really achieving our sustainability goals. Is not promise what you can do, but first promise and then see, can you do it?
All right, okay. Well, and on that note, we have to round up. 2 hours have been flying, and I like to move back to, and Julie, you've been listening in and you kicked off this conversation. Can you share some conclusive thoughts with us?
You know, I didn't talk a little bit about my role, but I have this kind of unique role in the bank where I have to connect companies such as all of yourselves here on the panel with investors and help investors understand all these nuances of these challenges that you have been talking about today. You know, because for example, I know Loic used the word circular economy, but then in the end, each one of you explained in your own way how that circular economy concept adjusts to your business model, right? And Arco, you mentioned several times what that looks like in a Brazilian context with a completely different regulation, and to try to explain all that complexity to investors, sometimes they get quite frustrated because they are looking for more and more standardization. And at the risk of sort of being a bit kind of controversial, I'm a little bit nervous for that standardization and when I hear your conversations, I can see how much more innovation there is to come, how much more R&D. And, I'm going to go back again to Arco because what you said stuck with me, that business system innovation that we need to solve and not just the technological innovation. And so I feel that, too much standardization could potentially limit that. And I keep trying to talk to investors saying, I need a little bit more empathy and patience and yes, it is complex and it is bespoke to every business model. And oftentimes they come back to me and say, well, that's just too difficult. And especially when I look at the UN SDGs across those businesses, it's 17, it's too difficult. And Hildegard, you said this so well, is the point of the 17 SDGs is that for the first time, all sustainability experts, NGOs, all the multilaterals, the governments are saying we can't just have environmental performance at the cost of social issues. And we can't just have social, performance at the cost of our planet. Every single one of those has to be addressed and the solutions have to support holistically all those 17 areas. So it is complex. It has to be complex, And so, I love her. If Greta can get that, at 16 and accept that complexity and not be afraid of it, I think I'm going to keep fighting to tell investors to accept, each and every one of your business models in its own way, to accept your transition journey in the way that makes sense, to bring all your employees along and your supply chain along. And I think I love Cecile's line. I'm going to steal it. I don't think there's a day in which we don't work on the SDGs.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Anjali. Time has been flying, and basically, I think your note has been: we all have to embrace complexity to move forward. Okay, and on that note, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to thank the audience for listening in. And I think on a later stage, the link can be shared. So if there were more things to be known about this, we'll share it with you. Thank you very much.